Dumelang, welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Manyatela. Great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, will the Finance Minister be able to follow the parliamentary processes before the 1st of May to give effect to that VAT hike reversal? That's the question now, following his announcement that he will table an amendment bill that reverses the VAT hike. But also, what does this U-turn by the Finance Minister mean for the Government of National Unity? The ANC leader, who was in charge of negotiating with other parties about the budget, is the party's chief whip in Parliament, Mdumiseni, and he joins us tonight. Also on the show, what does the DA plan on negotiating as part of the court settlement with Treasury's lawyers? It was the lawyers of the Finance Minister that contacted the DA last night asking for an out-of-court settlement. But what will that entail? Helen Zille is the DA's federal executive. She joins us tonight. And then later, is Russia prepared for an unconditional ceasefire with Ukraine? The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, told the president he is during his state visit earlier today. But is President Vladimir Putin? We'll speak to International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola about that historic visit by President Zelenskyy and other international relations issues. But first, my comment. South Africa is alive with possibilities. There's truly never a dull moment in this country. As we now know, VAT is being done away with. That's the announcement that the Minister of Finance made late last night. Treasury's lawyers contacted the Democratic Alliance's lawyers last night to negotiate an out-of-court settlement, we're told. The Finance Minister will now be introducing an amendment bill that annuls the VAT hike. There are still questions about how the Finance Minister will be able to follow all these parliamentary processes required to give effect to this VAT cancellation, because the only way to overturn the increase is for Parliament to adopt a new rates and monetary amounts and amendment of the Revenue Laws Bill. But will that happen before the 1st of May? Well, Parliament released a statement earlier today saying the Minister's announcement may require Parliament to review its program. Now, following this announcement by the Minister, there's been briefing after briefing. First up, it was the DA. And Helen Zille made it clear during that briefing that if it wasn't for the DA's court application, the Finance Minister wouldn't have made the U-turn.
It was clear that the DA's court intervention was the pivotal intervening factor that has enabled the people of South Africa to come out victorious and to show them why their vote really mattered. It is crucially important for us to hold the balance of power at the will of the voters so that we can win battles, not by grace and favor of kind concessions by the ANC, but because we have the numbers in Parliament and we have the muscle in the courts and the arguments in the courts to stand up for the public who make it possible for us. This is the victory of all South African taxpayers. We'd like to thank you all for coming into this fight shoulder to shoulder with us. We'd like to thank you in your thousands for having signed our petitions and stood with us in this battle.
That's what the federal executive for the DA said. And I think she's right. Had it not been for the DA and the EFF court case, the Finance Minister was adamant that VAT will come in on the 1st of May. The Minister said so to the SABC about a week or so ago. He said it to other media houses as well. He even repeated it in legal arguments this week until he realized that he was fighting a losing battle. His lawyers struggled in court this week. And when he realized that he will lose come the 28th of April, when judgment is delivered, he contacted the DA and said, let's work out a court settlement. The DA and the EFF lawyers put up a strong case this week around this matter. Now, if really the Finance Minister was so convinced by the proposals from the smaller parties, and that's why he has changed his mind, why is he not telling us which of those proposals by the smaller parties he'll be implementing? And if indeed he was convinced by the smaller parties, why did he say 2 weeks ago, last week, and this week as well, that he doesn't have any other alternatives to VAT, and that VAT will increase, it can't be stopped? How convenient that his mind changes suddenly after a disastrous showing by his legal team in court this week. So I think it's the disastrous showing in court that made him think again. He was resolved. This was the hill the finance minister was willing to die on. And that's why he stood firm on the VAT hike, even in his responding affidavit, until his lawyers realized this week that they're not going to win this case. Read the finance minister's affidavit. Check out what his lawyers said this week. He had made up his mind about the VAT hike. The minister in court, through his lawyers, even called Action SA's understanding that he will reverse VAT as a misunderstanding and said he can't really take responsibility for that. So he effectively poured cold water on the discussions the ANC was having with other parties. There was no political will whatsoever from Treasury to reverse VAT until this week. This is what the EFF's legal counsel, Advocate Thembeka Ngcukaitobi, said in court to drive this point home.
I will submit that the process through which the VAT increase was adopted is itself irrational and unconstitutional. In fact, it has elements of deception, because what they did, the minister and those who sponsored the increase, created the impression that it was subject to change. When you now read their affidavits, they say that they've always known that it was never subject to change from the 12th of March. So if you are a public representative and you go to Parliament and you tell your colleagues, don't worry, vote with me, this may change, you are deceiving them. And that is an improper use of public power.
That's precisely the point that Advocate Ngcukaitobi was trying to make. How do you negotiate with other parties and say, this thing is going to change? And then you come in court and you say, it was never our intention to change it in the first place. But your party said, over the next 30 days, you're going to find alternatives. And as the finance minister, you come in court and you say, it was never the intention to change VAT. The ANC insists that it was the discussions with the smaller parties that culminated in VAT being scrapped. Here's what Fikile Mbalula said earlier today.
We also held extensive discussions through this month, from the 9th of April, intensive discussions in the past 2 weeks in the same hotel with different political parties, even those who have chosen to go to court, to engage with them on the question of the budget. And that have showcased on our part that we've got a bigger role to play than just political posturing for the country. Even those that went to court, we engaged them. But we did not ask them to get out of court. They did engage, they did raise their views about the budget. And we do appreciate political parties that have come together to patch the budget framework. And these political parties never fudged their views, never fudged their intentions when they agreed to pass the budget. It was very clear that we need to deal and review the VAT increase. And today, after extensive engagement, it has resulted in the Treasury also coming to the party to agree with all of us that VAT review will not be implemented as it was presented before. And we welcome, as the African National Congress, that statement of Treasury. No disruptions, no instability, but the interest of South Africa come first.
That's what Fikile Mbalula said earlier today. In my view, the finance minister isn't withdrawing VAT because he's convinced by proposals from other parties. He's conceding before he can be forced to by the court. And I wonder how you see it. What do you think of how the finance minister has handled this budget? The EFF is actually calling on him to resign immediately. They're saying that the way that he's handled this issue has threatened the economic stability of the country and by consequence threatened the livelihoods of South Africans. So what do you think of how things have played out this week? And what do you think of how the finance minister has handled this matter? Share your thoughts with us. Send us a WhatsApp voice note on 078-459-1897. Remember to tell us your name and surname and where you're sending that voice note from. Please keep it at 30 seconds. Alternatively, you can send us an X on @FaceTheNation SABC. After the break, the DA and the ANC speak to us. Stay with us here on Face the Nation. Welcome back. Now, some political parties have poured cold water on the DA's assertion that it was victorious in securing the removal of the half a percentage point VAT increase. Earlier, the ANC and other smaller parties held a joint media briefing on their discussions to resolve the fiscal framework in Sandton. The parties claimed that the DA was outside of the discussion process. For more on this, we're joined by the ANC Chief Whip, Zille Ntuli, and the DA Federal Council Chairperson, Helen. Helen and Mdumiseni, thank you to both of you for making time for us. I'll start with you, Mdu. There's a lot that's happened. Treasury makes this announcement last night, and then what follows now are going to be lots of processes that must give effect to that pronouncement by the finance minister. So what happens next, and will everything be done before the 1st of May?
Well, thanks, Clement. Good evening to you and good evening to the viewers at home, and of course, good evening to Madam Zille as well. Let me just explain briefly where the process is now. The minister issued a statement in which he withdrew the 0.5% VAT increase. Many people may have not noticed this. The minister had not presented to Parliament what is called the rates bill, which is where he actually, in terms of the law, has to articulate for parliamentary adoption the sources through which he's going to be raising the revenue for expenditure in that financial year. Now, because the minister has not done that, if he had done it, the next step would be for him to amend the rates bill because he has taken this decision. But because that bill had not been presented to Parliament, in the formulation of that bill, he has to take into account the decision and the announcement that he has made early hours of the morning today. And once that has been done, the bill will serve before Parliament, and Parliament will interact with that bill. And of course, depending on the two processes, the two options that are available to the Minister, Clement, one option is that he may have to deal with the issues relating to using the avenues, the sources that we've identified as political parties, which will therefore require him not necessarily to change the fiscal framework because it will not affect the expenditure as well as what he needs to do for this financial year. If the other option is that he doesn't take on board the proposals that we have made about how to go about offsetting the VAT, and he chooses a path where he says, I'm going to cut on expenditure. I'm not taking these proposals as they are, but I'm going to cut on expenditure.
To offset
he
that.
is therefore required to revisit the fiscal framework and bring it back to Parliament.
Okay, and then once that rates bill is presented, though, does it need to be voted on? Do you need public participation?
That's correct. And after that, it must be taken to Parliament for adoption by Parliament.
So, unless those processes you've outlined take place, does VAT then remain?
No. VAT was in place by his announcement, if you remember, empowered by the Act. He has also made another announcement that I'm no longer going to use VAT as one of the options.
Except it's just an announcement. It doesn't have any legal validity.
It was also an announcement that he made.
No, but he was in Parliament. It was, in fact, in the fiscal framework. Right now, he's just released a statement. It's not directed to anybody. That doesn't have legal validity.
No, it does. It does. The minister is empowered by the law to determine the VAT and subject that to Parliament. And please don't confuse the presentation of the budget, the process of dealing with the fiscal framework by Parliament, and the process where Parliament must then deal with the rates bill which the minister must submit. The rate bill give effect to his public announcement.
Okay.
Without that process being undertaken by Parliament, his public announcement remains a public announcement without the authority of Parliament to have it enforced.
Okay. Helen, how do you understand where the process is right now? And as the DA, is this precisely what you are fighting in court, that the minister can just make an announcement like that? That has implications even on VAT. How do you understand where the process is now?
Where the process is now is that the minister has said that he will withdraw the VAT increase. That's what he said. He said that he would make us an offer, which he did do. We made a counter offer, and we're waiting to hear if he accepts our counter offer, which we will then make an order of court. So that is the one option that we can go down. We can settle out of court as the minister requested us to do yesterday, and we can make the settlement an order of court, which would then nullify the VAT increase. Mm-hmm. We also have to hear from the speaker, because there were two respondents in this case. One was the minister and the other was the speaker. And so we have to find out whether the court will have to nullify the procedures in the Portfolio Committee and in Parliament that accepted the fiscal framework with a VAT increase, or whether we will be able to find a way forward with Parliament agreeing to review and rescind that decision.
Yeah. What offer is the finance minister making? Because when they contacted you guys last night, they said, we want to settle out of court, and anybody who comes to you to settle out of court is an admission that they can see that they're not going to win this case. So what settlement offer are they making to the Democratic Alliance?
That's precisely right. It was an admission that they weren't going to win the case, and they would prefer to settle with us rather than get an adverse judgment from the court. Now, they were agreeing to withdraw the VAT increase, to nullify the fiscal framework, and to look for alternative sources of revenue. We responded that we still wanted to take Part B of our application, which is to have Section 7.4 of the VAT Act declared unconstitutional, and we want to ensure that we can continue with that particular case in the court, because we believe that the minister should not have the sole power to announce a VAT increase. That is the power of Parliament, and we must continue with that part of our court application.
Okay.
We also wanted the minister to tender our costs.
Okay. Mdu, what is the status of the fiscal framework that was adopted? Does the minister have to now present a new fiscal framework? Because in his statement, he talks about the division of revenue bill and that other third bill. But what about the fiscal framework?
You see, Clement, what the minister has not dealt with in detail on his statement, and I understand why, is that given the submission, this statement is saying, having received various submissions, including from political parties, as per the decision that was taken by Parliament, I want to add, I have therefore reconsidered the application of the VAT for this fiscal framework or budget that he presented in Parliament. What he has not explained in detail, and I'm saying I understand why, because that requires him to do an internal exercise in the National Treasury, is which of the options presented to him is he going to be exploiting to offset the VAT. In his statement, he talks about the 70 billion over a medium term. But the options that are presented to him, including by the African National Congress, he has not dealt with how, in public at least, is he intending to offset the VAT using any or all of the options that are currently at his disposal. So that is an exercise that the minister has got to undertake internally in the Treasury and come back and present to Parliament or to the nation. And this is how now he intends taking the budget forward. Okay, so here's the challenge now, Mdu, because you indicated as the African National Congress earlier today that what the minister has announced now is the culmination of the discussions that he's had with other smaller parties and interfacing with the proposals they were making. But isn't it weird that the same minister who comes from the ANC last week makes public statements about how
it's just simply too late to stop the VAT bus. Last week and this week stresses us in court papers that it was never our intention to change the VAT hike. And yet you want to claim now as the ANC that this is a minister who took seriously the proposals that were made by the other smaller parties.
The minister issued a statement, Clement. It's not our claim, it's in his statement, that part of the reasons that have influenced his own position on this matter, a reconsideration of his earlier position, including what was ventilated in court, are submissions made by various players, including political parties. That is written down in his statement. The second point I want to make is that if the minister was involved, I can't speak on his behalf, but let's assume that he was involved or he is involved with the Democratic Alliance on another process through which they want to have an out-of-court settlement. Why does that not appear in his statement as part of his consideration? That I'm dealing with this matter not only because of the submissions you have made, but also because in the interaction that is taking place between my department and in relation to the case that is in court, we believe that we have a way in which we can find this out. Even if it doesn't specify the details, just to indicate to the public, take the public into confidence.
Do you not trust the DA when they say they've been speaking to Treasury's lawyers?
We were not part of that private conversation. Obviously, those discussions, Clement, are not just like me and you like this. They've got to be written down.
Yeah.
We will only believe what the DA is presenting on this matter when the document has been made public. And let me tell you why we would have it difficult to believe just the word of Madam Zille on this matter. The DA has led a very unrelenting and offensive campaign against the African National Congress on the basis of a lie. That one, the ANC is misleading the small parties that an intervention is possible within the parameters of the law for the VAT to be reversed before the 1st of May. And secondly, that the ANC is selling out the poor. That's the campaign that Helen and his party...
Let's hear from Helen. Helen, I mean, the suggestion here is that you guys are probably not telling us the truth. How do you respond to what Mdu is saying that, well, is it even true that you guys are talking to Treasury's lawyers and that they are indeed considering an out-of-court settlement with the Democratic Alliance? Are you lying to us?
Treasury's lawyers approached our lawyers yesterday evening, and then our lawyers contacted me. And they said Treasury's lawyers, or the minister's lawyers, have proposed an out-of-court settlement, and these are the terms. And we agreed that we would respond with a counter-offer requiring that they tender our costs and that we continue with Part B of the application. So that's simply a fact. Now, we know that the minister was misleading the smaller parties who then supported the fiscal framework with a VAT increase. He was misleading them into believing that he was still going to change the VAT increase because that is what he said in his court papers. In the papers that he delivered in reply to our papers last Thursday and that his lawyers answered in court on Tuesday this week, he said there was never any intention of withdrawing the VAT increase and that in fact it couldn't be withdrawn. That is what he said. After his showing on Tuesday, through his lawyers in the court, he suddenly had a change of heart. And then it was very important for the ANC to pretend that they had conceded to the arguments of the smaller parties, not caved into the DA's court case. And the ANC is misleading the public into pretending that it had an open mind on the VAT increase all along, when in his own papers, the minister said he was going ahead. It was impossible to do anything else but have the VAT increase, and the smaller parties were never justified to believe that he would withdraw the VAT increase. And now suddenly he has a different tune.
Why did he say that, Mdu? If the finance minister knew, as you say, that there's a possibility that the VAT hike may be scrapped, why did he say in court that we've never said that we were going to change the VAT hike?
Clement, the process were running concurrently. The discussion with the ministry and the Department of the National Treasury, with ourselves as the ANC and other political parties, was evolving at the same time as the ministers got to deal with the court papers. So there was no way that when the minister is going to defend a court case, he is going to say in court, I don't believe that my decision is incorrect, unless in the course of the interaction between him, his department and these parties were involved in the back-to-back conversation, he comes to a realization that actually there is a different way in which this matter can be handled, and these proposals are making sense. But I was also expecting you to ask Helen, maybe I should ask because I'm also in this conversation. Sure, she may not be comfortable to share what the minister's lawyers have written to them as an offer for an out-of-court settlement, but perfectly, I'm quite certain that the DA on his own, for his credibility on this matter, they should be at liberty to share with the public. This is how we responded to the minister's request, and therefore there's a discussion about an out-of-court settlement. I'm making this statement because the minister would have recognized that process in the public communication. What we stand with now, me and you and the South Africans, is what the minister said, and he has written it down on behalf of the department. How then are we going to be persuaded by a private conversation?
Have you spoken to your own minister and asked if this is really the case?
Which one? About
Minister of Finance, and say, are you asking for a out-of-court settlement with the DA?
Well, when this thing was went out about the DA, because the DA issued a statement, and we knew that the DA was going to react because this is naturally going to be embarrassing for them.
Yeah, but have you asked him? Have you said to him?
I'm coming to that point. So when that came, we sent it to I sent that to Enoch. You know he's overseas. To say to him, now we are being told that there is another, this is a statement of the DA. And his response to me is that I don't know what is this about.
I mean, that's bizarre, Helen. Are you guys prepared? Are you guys prepared to at least demonstrate to the public that there is a conversation ongoing, and this is just not smoke and mirrors?
Now, of course, this is smoke and mirrors on behalf of the ANC, because when the ANC realized they weren't going to win this court case, they quickly were prepared to offer us a settlement out of court, but at the same time, they wanted to pretend that the smaller parties had persuaded them. So they offered us an out-of-court settlement, but they didn't want us to talk about that publicly, obviously, because they wanted to have this joint press conference with the smaller parties today and say, we've listened to them and we're going to change our position. So they didn't like it when we put out a statement and said that the minister's lawyers have approached us for a settlement. And they certainly didn't like it when we pointed out that in his court papers last Thursday and on Tuesday, the minister said that there was never any agreement at all to withdraw VAT and that there was no alternative to the VAT increase. So what the ANC was trying to do was to end the court case on the one hand, pretend that they had conceded in the negotiations with the smaller parties on the other hand, and make us shut up about the fact that they didn't have a case. And of course, we aren't obliged to keep quiet. We put the facts on the table.
But Helen, how do I know that what you are saying is true? Like the public watching us now, to Mdu's point, I mean, if the finance minister tells his own comrades, I know nothing about that, I mean, that creates confusion about whether or not as the DA you're really having this conversation with the lawyer. So how do we know that in fact there's a conversation going on? How do you prove that?
Well, the lawyers for the minister must come out and say they never offered us a settlement. Because in fact they did. Now, as Mdu says, the minister is overseas. And this is the problem with the ANC. The left hand never knows what the right hand is doing. And the lawyers for the Treasury and the minister came back to us yesterday and said, we'd like to offer you an out-of-court settlement, that we'd like to make an order of court. We went back to them with a counter-offer to say we still want to continue with part 2 of our application to have section 7.4 of the VAT Act declared unconstitutional, and we want you to tender our costs.
Is that all
That's
on email?
What we went back to them with. That's what the discussion between our lawyers.
On email.
Our lawyers, Advocate Bishop and Mindy Shapiro and Smith. They were negotiating with the minister's lawyers, the Treasury's lawyers. And that is what's going on. If somebody else in the Treasury mandated the lawyers to do that and didn't tell the minister, I can't help that. But that is what we are used to with the ANC. For example, when there was that agreement on Bella at NEDLAC, when the president had agreed to the resolution that was reached in NEDLAC, and the Deputy Director of the Presidency had in fact signed that agreement, the President claimed he knew nothing about it.
Okay.
Now, it is a typical thing, and we never know what to believe from the ANC, but what we know is that we had an approach from their lawyers, and the lawyers must know that they have not got a strong case in court, and they would prefer for the minister to settle rather than be humiliated by the outcome of the court case.
Where does this leave the GNU? I mean, there have been many challenges, particularly between you as the ANC and the DA in this GNU. The President had already said the DA has defined itself outside of the GNU by also approaching the court. So where does this leave you? Today you held a briefing with all the other parties except the DA, which is part of the Government of National Unity.
Let me deal with the first issue first, just for a minute. Helen seems to be conflating the ANC with the state. Minister Kodongwane has taken the matter that he's defending in court on behalf of the democratic state, not the African National Congress. The ANC is not in court. I want to clear that. The second issue I want to clear is that, so the confusion therefore cannot arise and be justified that in the ANC you end up not knowing who exactly you should talk to and what is right and wrong at a given point in time. Coming to your question, the DA has in many respects defined itself outside the Government of National Unity in the following manner. A cabinet, Clement, a cabinet in this country, in terms of the law and by the policies and procedure of how government works, takes a decision that is binding to cabinet members. If you go out and you challenge a cabinet decision, you are defining yourselves outside the cabinet. It's unheard of. The DA, rather than coming to a conversation with the ANC, even post the fiscal framework adoption, because when Parliament accepted that the fiscal framework is adopted on condition that there will be 30-day period for the discussion on this matter, that was open to all of us, including the DA. But because the DA was not genuinely about the VAT, the DA knew that the VAT can be reversed before the 1st of May without going to court. It knew on the process that the ANC and other parties have agreed must be followed and adopted by Parliament. But the reason why they decided to rush to court to interdict the implementation of the VAT was because they were not willing to subject themselves into a process that was supposed to be followed by all parties in Parliament, and therefore decided to result in what I said is an offensive campaign anchored on lies, that the ANC is lying that there will be a way in which you can reverse the VAT before the 1st of May.
So where does it leave you and the DA in the GNU?
We are meeting with them tomorrow. I mean, I'll be interested to know how in their own mind the Government of National Unity works.
Why are you not kicking them out then? Because, I mean, you could very well bring in the Action SA and all the other parties you've worked with.
Look, we are not the GNU. We are a biggest party in the GNU, but we've got other 9 parties who
other
belong.
parties actually agree with you.
In the GNU.
I mean, if you asked any of those party leaders, they'll tell you that the DA can go. You've heard what their views are about the DA. Nothing stops you as a collective of the GNU. Nothing stops you from kicking out the DA. Sure,
but you see what has happened today. If you're making reference to today, it was a press conference about the VAT, without that having been agreed to and therefore containing the statement that was issued and read by the ANC national spokesperson. Parties decided voluntarily to express their own views. I'm
not talking about today, I'm talking about previously. I've heard
about the DA.
I've heard all the parties in the GNU, the party leaders in the GNU, I've heard their views about the DA. If you ask them tonight, can we kick the DA out? I can assure you, they'll say, sure, let's go ahead with it.
Well, I think the attitude of the ANC was that there was a meeting with the DA and all other parties last week. The attitude of the ANC has always been to say, maybe let's understand whether these people can present a rational explanation about their conduct. Because the conduct of the DA, in all honesty, has been very irrational. And our view was that you can't stand on the mountain and say, go away. That's not how it works. You've got, in the leadership context, you've got to satisfy yourselves that these people are beyond reproach. You have met with them. They are sustaining that irrationality. And therefore, you've got to go to the GNU and say, What do we do with a party that is completely irrational in the context of how the GNU is supposed to work?
Helen, if you are really irrational like that, and I mean, there are many times when you've disagreed with the same government that you are part of. The president, as I indicated, said you had been defining yourself outside of the GNU. So how do you justify staying in the same government that you are consistently at odds with and you can even take to court?
Well, let's see who's being irrational when the court makes a judgment. That's the first point I want to make. Secondly, we are part of the government. We're not at odds with the government. We're part of the government. And there is the statement of intent that explains how decisions are supposed to be made in government. And the rules say that it's not the ANC deciding and everybody falling in. We have clause 18 and 19, which says that decisions are taken by consensus. If we don't reach consensus, there's sufficient consensus, and then a process is set out to achieve sufficient consensus. The ANC has totally ignored that clause since the beginning. And so we haven't defined ourselves out of the GNU. We are simply trying to make the processes that are at the foundation of the GNU work. And the only party that went outside of the GNU was the ANC to negotiate with parties who are not members of the GNU to oust the DA. So the only party that has violated the terms of the GNU has been the ANC.
Just lastly, Mdu, as you respond to that, if the finance minister comes and says, well, there's going to be austerity, and then what happens? Because the other option you mentioned earlier is to cut in order to try and offset that 13-point-something billion rand that would have come as a result of VAT.
Well, I thought when Helen was quoting the clauses on the statement of intent, she is also going to make reference to the one that talks about the 60% of how decisions are made whenever there are fundamental differences. And earlier on you were saying all parties in the GNU agreed except the DA. And I'm sure that explains what that clause...
And you guys fundamentally, by the way, disagree on what that clause means.
Maybe let's leave that for now. We can deal with it if there's time. I want to come back to the point that we are raising. We are opposed to an austerity budget. We made submissions as the ANC, which we are convinced that those submissions must help us to avoid an austerity budget. For instance, when the minister presented the budget, Clement, at that time, SARS had not presented its own report for this year, which indicated that they've over-collected, they've gone beyond the expectation by 9 billion rand. What the VAT is supposed to cover for this year, just leave the medium term, just for this year, is 13 billion rand. Our contention is that why must we go on such an unpopular decision of raising the VAT when you have 9 billion rand that subsequently became available immediately after you presented the budget? It's only logical that you've got to revisit your numbers to take into consideration this new information, which otherwise was not at your disposal at that time. If you take that into account, it means the main issue is going to be, the issue is now going to be about 4 billion. The proposals we made as the African National Congress, they are looking at the short term and the long term. Short term being this year and beyond this year within the medium term. So our view is that there are no basis for the minister to take us to an austerity. The proposals we've made, which he says, have led him to take a decision to do away with the VAT. It helps us to avoid an austerity budget. And that is what we don't want to see happening as the African National Congress.
Helen, what will you be saying to the ANC tomorrow when they ask you, why are you still here? You've clearly defined yourself outside of this GNU. If all the other parties in this GNU say, actually it's time for you to go, what do you do?
Well, the interesting thing is that there were a whole lot of parties there today that aren't even in the GNU. So I don't know how the ANC is respecting the processes of the GNU. What we're saying is, from the beginning, we are in the GNU to stand up for South Africans, especially the poor, and to stand up for the voters that put us there. We've said that from the beginning. We negotiated a statement of intent that we have abided by to the letter all the time. The only party that has violated those clauses all the time is the ANC. They have defined themselves outside the framework which we negotiated as the basis for the GNU. We're going nowhere. And if the ANC wants this economy to collapse, they can see what they do about the DA, because it's the DA's presence in the GNU that is keeping what is still afloat of this economy. And the ANC knows that.
All right, Helen Zille, I've got to thank you. Mdumiseni?
No. I mean, there are no basis for Helen to argue that what makes the current government to work is because there's a DA. There's no such a thing like that. What is currently before this country as a program of this government is essentially in line with what has been implemented in the past administration before the DA joined the government of national unity.
All right.
And for Helen as well, Clement, to argue that the ANC called other political parties, we were clear. We invited parties who supported us on the fiscal framework. We were not changing the composition of the GNU, but we have to be loyal and committed to the undertaking we made, which has produced the outcome that is in the best interest of South Africa.
Zille Ntuli, Helen Zille, I thank both of you for making time for us. After the break, we'll have that conversation with the Minister of International Relations, Ronald Lamola. Stay with us here on Face the Nation. Welcome back. So the question we've been asking you tonight is what you make of what really transpired late last night with that statement from the finance minister, and of course how the various political parties have responded, and what do you make of how the Minister of Finance dealt with this entire matter? Let's listen to some of your WhatsApp voice notes before that conversation with the Minister of International Relations.
Hello, Clement. It's Jabu here. I also see it the same as you see it. If it wasn't for the DA's court battle, they would have been retreated. So it's the DA that won.
Hi, Clement. It's Tabo here. I think you underestimated the wisdom of the small parties. Action SA, BOSA, and they stated that the VAT will not be increased come the 1st of May. And it stayed like that. It hasn't been increased. That simply means they knew something which you did not know.
Good evening. This is AB from Hammanskraal. I think the VAT hike thing was an eye-opener to us as South Africans. We thank the DA and the EFF for the court case. Otherwise, we will question BOSA, Action SA, and all the other parties that voted for this budget, which had the VAT hike in it, if they have the best interests of South Africans. All they're doing now is just trying to do damage control. That's all.
Thank you so much for your WhatsApp voice notes. We also have some tweets that have come through responding to this conversation. Some of you talking about what should be happening to the finance minister. Dennis says the final reversal in regards to keeping the current VAT was a better solution that was otherwise going to send the GNU and ANC straight to the coffins. In fact, we should have a much reduced VAT as from now if the government is equally concerned about the country's economics. Bono says credit must go to the DA. They stood their ground and took this matter to court even though they're in the GNU. They didn't care about Minister Kotongwana's utterances in Parliament when he said you can't be part of implementation if you reject the VAT hike. This is victory for the DA. Thank you so much for your tweets. Now, let's move to this. President Cyril Ramaphosa has confirmed that he had a telephonic conversation with US President Donald Trump this morning ahead of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy's visit to South Africa. Ramaphosa says he and Trump discussed a number of issues, including the war in Ukraine. Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine more than 3 years ago. President Ramaphosa earlier this week said he also spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ramaphosa addressed the media in Pretoria alongside President Zelenskyy earlier today. Ronald Lamola is the Minister of International Relations joining us on the line. Minister, thank you so much for making time for us. Good evening.
Good evening, Clement, and to the viewers.
What a busy week it's been for the president. He has spoken to the Russian president over the phone. He spoke to the U.S. president over the phone. And today he hosted the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And I want us to start with that visit by the Ukrainian president. I mean, it's quite historic, isn't it? It's the first ever trip by a Ukrainian president in this democracy.
Yes, indeed, Clement, despite the fact that South Africa always had diplomatic relations with Ukraine since our democracy, it was the first visit by the president of Ukraine, informed by the fact that by the Africa Peace Initiative visit that the president undertook to Ukraine and also to Russia to place on the table the 10-point plan that came through the Africa Initiative. And the engagements today were centered on that, and we are glad from the fact that some of the components of it are beginning to bear fruit, as we have heard President Zelenskyy saying that he's ready for engagements for a ceasefire in an unconditional manner. And there are issues that he has put on the table for the request with regards to 400 Ukrainian children. And the engagement between President Ramaphosa and President Putin reflect the fact that there is a role of bridge that South Africa can play in this matter to help the diplomatic process that is going towards the peaceful negotiations. Yeah.
What does the president of Ukraine mean by "I am willing" to agree to an unconditional ceasefire? Because previously he wanted some security guarantees. Does this mean he doesn't want that anymore?
Clement, it is a positive step because he says he's ready to enter into negotiations with no conditions. And any issues will be debated or will be engaged at the negotiation table. And we think this is a good step in the right direction because it will enable the parties in the conflict to engage on the issues of dispute and issues that they believe themselves as the parties can agree on. And as you will remember, South Africa has always maintained an issue of an inclusive engagement. It's also part of what he now agrees with, that the negotiations must include Russia, and the negotiations must be inclusive. Ukraine must be, because you will remember this has always been our position, that you cannot resolve this conflict without all the parties on the table. So we are looking forward to them engaging, and was also an important context that there was also a call with President Trump, because it also gave the two presidents to also compare and share notes with regards to this conflict and also issues of bilateral relations between the U.S. and South Africa. Yeah.
Is President Putin, though, ready for an unconditional ceasefire? When he spoke to the president over the telephone line, is it something that he perhaps expressed support to, that he's willing to enter these negotiations without any conditions? Because he, too, has had conditions that he also made clear even to the U.S. President Donald Trump.
No, he indicated that he's willing to allow an engagement, and that that engagement, obviously, with the U.S. has become the key center of this process. As you will be aware, the special envoy of President Trump is in Moscow as we speak to further the talks that were started and also the engagements that ended yesterday in London. So there is a process of engagement. I think that is the important part, that there is the diplomatic track that is now in motion, whereas in the past there were difficulties for the two parties to engage. So this is a step in the right direction.
While the president of Ukraine was busy meeting with the president, reports were suggesting that Russia carried out an airstrike on Ukrainian capital Kyiv. 8 people, we're told, were left dead, resulting even in the Ukrainian president cutting short this trip to South Africa. I mean, is what Russia has done now a sign of interest in peace, a sign of interest in a ceasefire?
Yeah, as you have heard, both presidents have said that they don't read that to mean that it's a sabotage of the trip to South Africa. They saw it as a continuation of what has already been a raging conflict between the two countries. But they both emphasize the need for dialogue, for a peaceful engagement. And as per your first question, Russia had indicated also to the parties who are interlocutor to this process that they are still committed to engagements. And that's why also the special envoy of the U.S., as the same question that you are asking, if you had an opportunity, you're also going to ask him, is also in Moscow as we speak now, is in Moscow. They are engaging with him with regard to the same matter, but I think the fact that there is that diplomatic track and engagement, it's a sign that parties are willing to engage, and they can lead, this can lead to that peaceful engagement, including a ceasefire.
Yeah. This call between our president and the U.S. president, was it just a standard call that was arranged way in advance, or was it arranged this week when Donald Trump, realized that we will be hosting the Ukrainian president?
It is a call that we have always wanted to see happening. Fortunately, it happened now this week. So it also gave the two presidents an opportunity to engage about President Zelenskyy's visit to South Africa. Okay. But as you have heard from the president, it did not end with President Zelenskyy's visit. It also dealt with the issues of bilateral relations between the two countries, and also the presidents agreeing that at some point there will be a need for them to meet, to iron out the challenges that the two countries are facing. So it was a very important call, which also signifies and signals the importance of the bilateral relations of the two nations. Yeah,
and speaking of bilateral relations between the two nations, how far is the process of appointing an ambassador to the U.S.? And when does Mdumiseni Jonas leave as well for his first trip to the U.S. as he starts his work as presidential envoy?
Yeah, as we said, Clement, in the press briefing that I had with Minister Tau in responding to the executive orders and the tariffs, the first process was, we said that the first process will be to appoint a special envoy who must help to smoothen the situation and lay the lay of the land. When that assessment has been made in terms of the lay of the land, we will then be able to help the president to appoint an ambassador. At this stage, that is the first step, is the one of the special envoy dealing with the current, to smoothen the current situation. So we are glad that today the president, through the diplomatic channels, they were able to engage, and we believe that the special envoy will further add to this ongoing work that is happening to reset the bilateral relations of the two countries.
All right, Ronald Lamola, the Minister of International Relations, thank you for making time for us on Face the Nation this evening. And thanks to you for watching the Thursday edition of Face the Nation. We'll be back with you on Tuesday at 8 p.m. Have a good evening. Cheers.